welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is going to be all about how to safely keep cats as well as rats, mice and other small pets. So this is something I get asked about quite a lot, having recently got this guy, and I thought I would shed some light on the situation. Isn't that right? Should we tell everyone our secret of how we do it safely? So I often get questions or comments on my videos saying I would love to have rats and mice but I can't because I've already got a cat, or the other way around, saying that you'd love to get a kitten or a cat but you feel like you can't because you've got rats, mice or other small pets. And I'm here to tell you that it is entirely possible. You just have to be really careful, make sure you know the behaviour of each animal you've got, and just make sure to do things very safely. I do get the odd comment telling me that I'm a horrible person for getting a cat when I've got rats, mice and other small pets, and obviously I don't feel that way because if I did, I would not have got him in the first place, and we're not going to go into how ridiculous that is, but I do get the odd comment telling me that I'm horrible to my rats and mice for getting a cat, and I want to tell you guys why that is not the case. So the fact is, it can be done and it can be done safely. Thousands of people all around the world have multi-pet households with prey and predator species. You just have to make sure you're being sensible and you understand the behaviour of each individual pet. Which brings me on to today's video sponsor, which is Skillshare. So you know I've been working with Skillshare to give you guys access to an online learning community for creative and curious people to all come together in their learning journey for topics such as illustration, photography, video editing like I'm doing right now. But you are not just limited to these topics on Skillshare. There are thousands of classes with short lessons on a range of topics you might not have even thought of, just like this one on cat behaviour rectification and care by Aman Gupta. So even if you're not looking to perfect an art skill, there's still something for everyone over on Skillshare. All of Skillshare's classes are designed with real life and real people in mind, so whether you're looking for something to stay inspired or a new way to express yourself, most of the classes on Skillshare are all under 60 minutes, so these allow you to fit them in between any of your other real life commitments like school, work or taking care of your pets. So Skillshare have actually given you guys access to a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, and that is available to the first 1,000 of you that use the link in my description. Also, I would love to know what kind of classes or skills you've been working on. If you guys took advantage of the offer last time I partnered with Skillshare, please leave me a quick comment down below because I'd love to know what kind of things you've been working on. So yeah, thank you so much Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Now I did actually do a poll on Twitter because I was really curious about how many of you had cats and rats and mice and how you made it work, and the results are really interesting. So almost 300 people took part in my poll on Twitter, and 40% of them have a cat and either rats or mice, 26% have a dog and either rats or mice, and 34% either just have rats or mice. So actually the winning percentage here is that most people tend to have cats and also small pets like rats and mice, so not surprising to me, but obviously all of these people are making it work somehow. Then I also asked people whether their cats always have access to the room that their small pets are in, or if they share a room or a living space, or if they have their own separate rooms for the small pets, and 40% of people said that the cats always have access to where their small pets are, and 60% have their own separate room for their rats, mice or other small pets. Then I was also interested in how the cats behave around the small pets, and 63% of people said their cats mostly ignore them and don't really pay them too much attention. 27% of people said that their cats are very interested in their small pets. 7% of people believe their cats possibly pose a high risk to their small pets, and 3% of people said their cats have previously or nearly harmed their small pets, which I was hoping that would be 0%, but 3% of people answered that, so in the grand scheme of things, most of the cats tend to ignore the small pets, which is what you want. So I thought those results were really interesting. I probably should have added another option for my cat is absolutely terrified of my small pets, because that seemed to be a common theme in the replies to the tweet. And thank you guys for taking part in that poll if you took part. Mostly from that I gather that most people do actually have cats and rats and mice, and mostly for the most part they tend to ignore them and they coexist with them, and people are making it work. But there are definitely some tips to help this work, whether you're thinking of adding a cat or you're thinking of adding a small pet like rats and mice. There are definitely some tips to make sure this is done as safely as possible. So the first tip, and this is probably going to be the biggest one and most important, is just do not let them interact in the first place. Now I know this is probably going to invite so many comments from people saying your cats get along with your rabbits, your guinea pigs, your hamster, your mice. While this may work for you and it may be true, I will never sit here and recommend it because I just don't think it's worth the risk. Personally, I just think it's far too risky. One tiny scratch on your hamster or your mouse, even if your cat is playing with them, this can then cause an infection and ultimately this can cause them to die. So I just do not think it's worth the risk. The cat does not benefit from this really. It doesn't benefit from having a friend that's not the same species. And also if you're keeping social animals like rats and mice, they should already have their own friends in the form of other rats and mice. They don't need a supplement friend on top of that in the form of a cat or a dog. They just don't need that extra social attention because they should be getting all of that they need from other rats or other mice already. So if you have a single rat or a mouse, please get them friends of the same species. A cat or a dog will not replace that, and I just don't think it's worth risking that anyway. So please don't ever introduce your cats or dogs to your rats and mice. They're not going to be a really good friend for them. Mostly they will just tolerate each other, but I don't think it's worth the risk and I would never advise it either. They also can't communicate with them in the same way that other rats and mice would. They can't play with them or groom them in the exact same way, and they do have different behavioural signals and cues that are going to be very confusing for other animals like rats and mice. And when you think about the very tiny benefits you may experience compared to the risks being quite significantly high, I don't think it's worth it when you weigh those two things up. And I do think just to play it safe and to have the safest option when it comes to keeping cats, just as a general rule, always keep them separate and never allow them to interact. The second tip I have for you is just to keep the cats out. If you're lucky enough to have your own separate pet room or you've got a spare bedroom with your pets in, always either keep the cats out, never let them in there, or always monitor them when they are in there just to be safe. Now, this doesn't mean the cat can't go into the room with you supervising. I do think there's certain benefits to allowing the cat access when you're with them and correcting unwanted behaviours or distracting them with treats and toys, allowing them to not be too focused on the rats and the mice. I do think that is also a really good idea, but I do recommend if you're out of the house, whether your small pets are in your bedroom, close that door, possibly even have a lock on the door, just so the cats aren't unsupervised with them, because that's when accidents and unfortunate things can happen. So please never leave your cats unattended with your rats or your mice or the room they're in. Please always make sure they're either shut out or you're in there with them. Accidents can happen really easily. All it takes is for your rat's tail to flop out of the bars if they're asleep and their tail flops out the bars. Most cat toys are modelled on dangly things like rat tails. This is far too tempting for cats and they can actually attack them and bite the tails off. So things like this happen really quickly. Even if you're watching them and monitoring them, this can happen in the space of a couple of seconds. So please make sure if you do have cats and rats and mice, they're not having unsupervised access to the room they're in. Obviously there are situations where people have either open plan houses or apartments, or their rats and mice are in their living rooms and they can't really shut the cats out all the time. Some people do make this work. Some people have cats that don't even look in the rats and mouses direction. I would say still be as careful as possible, but I do appreciate that it's not always possible to shut the cats and the mice out, and if you don't have a house that would accommodate for this, I would possibly rethink whether it's safe enough to get small pets in the first place. My next tip would be to get the most secure cage possible. If you already have a cat and you're thinking about possibly getting rats, mice, other small pets, I do recommend going for the sturdiest cage possible. For example, I do recommend if you're thinking of getting a hamster or mice, go for a big glass tank instead of a barred cage that cats can possibly stick their paws through and scratch your hamster or your mouse. Big glass tanks are going to be a lot more secure and give your cat a lot less access. So when it comes to keeping cats and rats, I do recommend going for probably the higher end, more expensive, big metal cages, and these are going to be a lot more sturdy. Try to go for one that has the smallest bar spacing possible, just again to prevent cats putting their paws through the gaps. And I do recommend trying to go for a cage that has a cage stand. Most big metal cages these days have cage stands, and this is just going to keep your rats elevated off the floor away from the cats. You could also do what I've done and buy sheets of Perspex to make a Perspex tray in the base, and I recommend doing this anyway just to give them a bit more bedding at the bottom, but I do recommend doing this to create an added barrier between the cats and the rats when they're on the base of the cage, when they're probably feeling a bit more vulnerable. The cats can't easily reach in through the bars and get them when they're sat there or when they're eating. It just adds another barrier which will again prevent cats from reaching in and swiping at them. I would also recommend opting for a cage that has a complicated latch system. Sometimes even I struggle to open the cage I've got just because the latch requires you to twist it in various different directions to actually open the door. I think it's the critter trails that have just a squeeze latch system. I wouldn't recommend this kind of cage just because it is so easy for the cats to knock this and possibly squeeze it open. So if you have a cage like that, I would look into possibly getting locks on the cage doors. But I do recommend cages like the Pet Planet cage. The latch is so difficult to open that even I struggle, so I think a cat would probably have the same trouble. So in general, when it comes to cages, whether for rats, mice, hamsters, other small pets, I would try to avoid flimsy plastic-based cages that easily can be slid off tables or knocked over and opened. I would go for the heaviest, sturdiest cage possible, whether it's a tank or a heavier metal cage. Just try to go for something that's going to be really difficult for the cat to get access to, and also try to put them as high up as possible, just so the cat can't easily access the rats and the mice. So my next tip is to try to desensitize your cat to the presence of your small pets, and this is easier said than done. So when it comes to cats, you have two options really. You can either always keep them shut out and not let them know that the rats, mice, hamsters exist, try to keep them in two separate worlds, or you can allow your cat access to the room and try to teach them that the rats and the mice are not interesting, nothing to get excited over and riled up over, and try to desensitize them to their presence. So your cat is allowed to be naturally curious. They're allowed to walk up to the cage, sniff the cage. What you don't want is them becoming overly excited and jumping on the cage, pouncing on the cage, any kind of vocalization like growling, hissing, any kind of meowing at the cage. You just want them to be naturally curious but not overexcited. Then you want to reward them with either a treat or their favourite toy. Anytime they lose interest or their attention is diverted from the cage, reward them with a treat or play with them with their favourite toy, distract them from the cage, and gradually they should start to learn that whatever's going on in the rat cage or the mouse cage is not as interesting as a treat or a toy instead. So this is something that I've been working on with my kitten. Honestly, he's more interested in a random piece of paper on the pet room floor. He's not that interested in the mice or the rats. Obviously that could change as he gets older, but right now he's mostly just low-key terrified of them. He's not really stalking them or hunting them. He's just interested in being in the room and playing in all their free roam boxes. He's more interested in going in their boxes than looking at them or watching what they're doing, so hopefully it stays that way. But obviously this is not always the case. Some cats do have a much higher prey drive, and it won't matter how many treats or toys you give them, they will just be focused on the rats or the mice, and despite anything you do, you can't really stop that natural urge to predate on them and be interested in them. So I do recommend in this case, just for everyone's safety, keep the cats out of that room. My next tip is to choose the right cat for you. Obviously, if you already have a cat, this is not going to be possible. But if you've not already got a cat and you're thinking of adopting one, I do recommend trying to pick the right cat that's going to fit in with your lifestyle. I would recommend this anyway, but especially when you've got small pets. Which is the reason I decided to go for a kitten or a younger cat, which people love to remind me is a really terrible thing. Even though in my eyes rescuing is rescuing, if a cat needs a home or a kitten needs a home, giving them that home is good enough. But people love to guilt you for not getting an older cat. There's no point adopting an older cat into your lifestyle if it's not going to fit, or if you think it might pose a risk to your other pets. You also have to have your other pets in mind as well, so don't let people guilt you if you want to get a kitten and you feel like that's going to be a safer option. I love that I've been trying to get him to sit here this whole video, and now that I'm almost done, he's decided now is the right time to come and sit here. So I was reading an article right before I filmed this from a vet called Roy Cruzen, and that stated that cats older than 3 years old and have been indoor cats are less likely to hunt small pets. Early spay and neuter also reduces reproductive, territorial and hunting behaviours, so I guess this is something to also keep in mind. Obviously every cat is different. You could adopt a kitten that grows up to have a very high prey drive. You could also adopt a really docile older cat that really is not fazed or bothered by anything or any other small pet. It really does depend on the individual cat. Personally for me, I just felt safer getting a younger cat just because they're in that stage where they're more receptive to learning, and it's going to be a lot easier to train them and condition them to live safely with everyone else in the household. And that was like the most important thing to me when getting a cat, is making sure that all of the other pets are still going to be safe as well. So perhaps if you are thinking of adopting a cat from a shelter, go to the shelter, play with the cats, talk to the staff members that probably know the cats really well and try to distinguish which ones probably have a lower prey drive. Those are probably going to be the ones most suitable to a household full of small pets. Now my last tip is to obviously be mindful of your small pet's behaviours, whether it's any kind of change such as moving house, getting a dog, getting a cat or a child coming over. These can all be really unsettling to small pets, and it's really important to also monitor their behaviour too. So for the first few days or weeks of bringing home a new dog or a cat, you can see changes in your rat's or mouse's behaviour, and I would liken this to when you bring them home for the first time. Obviously they're in a new environment with new smells and new sounds, and this can be really daunting to them, and obviously over time they get used to this and they settle, and I would say it's very similar to bringing home a dog or a cat. You just have to get used to it. Now this is something I got asked quite a lot when I adopted Hubble, is how have the rats and the mice reacted to him. Obviously they've not met him face to face. They did have a tiny reaction. The mice actually did not react at all. They are still going about their life perfectly normal. They can be in the same room as him and not even notice. They haven't changed at all, but the rats, I would say they definitely noticed the difference. Nothing drastic. I think in the first couple of days, even now to be honest, they spend a bit more time sniffing the air, trying to work out what the heck is the smell that's in the room with them. But you may see a rat spending a bit more time in their hammocks or their hides, being a bit more cautious about exploring the cage or being in the room. They may kind of revert back to how you got them if they were scared when you first got them. This should go away. These behaviours should start to stop as they start to adjust to having something else in the house with them that smells a little bit different and it seems a bit scary at first. I also recommend washing your hands in between touching your cat and touching your rats and mice, just so the scent of the cat is not on your hands, because you could possibly get bitten if they're that terrified of the scent of the cat to start with. Also just give them treats, give them as much positive reinforcement as possible, and they should gradually start to learn that things are okay, there is no immediate threat, and they should start to adjust very quickly because rats adjust really well to new environments and it should not take too long at all. I always like to bring up the fact that I keep my rats and my mice in the same room, and I've never seen any adverse effects in their behaviours. Some sources will tell you that you can't keep them in the same room because the scent of the rats will just keep them living in fear and they'll be terrified the whole time. My mice are like the happiest mice. They don't even care about the rats at all. Obviously they've never come into contact and there is safety measures to ensure that the rats and the mice never mix. But rats are actually a natural predator to mice. If they find them in the wild, they will catch them, kill them, possibly even eat them, but I've never seen any changes or effects in my mouse's behaviour. And again, it's another example of the fact that as long as you're doing things safely, you can have predator and prey in the same room and not have any adverse effects. So yeah, those were just a few tips on how to safely keep cats, rats, mice, other small pets, and it's really important to remember that our pets, as much as we love them, do have natural instincts they can revert to, and it's really dangerous to ignore these. So yeah, that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching and I hope it was helpful if you're thinking of either getting rats, mice, another small pet, and you've already got a cat in the home, or you're thinking of doing what I did and making the best decision of your life and bringing home a cat when you've already got small pets. I hope this was helpful. Just make sure you're doing things really safely. Also make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in my next video. Bye! Can we talk about how big he's getting? The last time I filmed something like this with him, he fit on the sides of my palm and now he's huge. You're getting so big. You're getting so big. Who let you get so big? I did. I did.